Hi students, welcome to the massive open online course on international economics. Today we will discuss module number 31 and this module talks about distortion and immeasurization. If you look at the title of this module, this is almost not at the middle of this course, but almost at the end of the course in the sense that before this module, we have some prerequisite knowledge of international trade theory and also have some knowledge about the policies. And then comes distortion and immeasurization. Both these two words are very new to all of us. You have not heard of this word distortion in our previous analysis and also immeasurization. So, we need to discuss these two issues very briefly but very clearly before we understand what is the implication of distortion and what do you understand by immeasurization in the perspective of international trade policy. So as I am saying that it is the effect of international trade policy, this means that the distortion in the economy may be there to start with, or distortion may be generated in the economy because of some government initiatives, or maybe because of some policy initiatives. So our main motive would be to check if there is any distortion due to any of these three possibilities, then whether that distortion is leading to some kind of situation where the outcome may not be desirable for the society, outcome may not be desirable for the agents of the economy. And agents are, as you know, the buyers and the sellers. So let us very quickly go to the structure of today's lecture and then we will decipher one by one. So first of all, as you know, we will talk about the introduction and the taxonomy of distortion. And then what kind of distortions are there? There could be consumption, there could be production. There could be foreign distortion, there could be domestic distortion, there could be endogenous distortion, there could be exogenous distortion. I'm not going to go into the details of all kinds of distortion, but the spirit of the analysis will remain intact because distortion means which is not normal. And then what is immeasurization? How this distortion and immeasurizations are interconnected with each other. And as you know, at the end of today's lecture, I will try to give you a brief summary of what we have discussed today. Now, one by one, my request to all of the students for today's lecture is that please try to follow whatever I am discussing here very clearly and very minutely, because I am not going to use much of diagrammatic explanation, not much of numerical examples, but we need to decipher some intuitive explanation, decipher some concepts of microeconomics and international trade to understand what is meant by distortion and related immeasurization. So what is distortion? Let us start from that thing. Distortion is a situation of Pareto suboptimal or socially suboptimum production and consumption of commodities. Students, now if I ask you, do you have any idea about Pareto suboptimality or suboptimum production or consumption? Some of you may have this idea, but my responsibility is to reiterate the idea very briefly. The Pareto suboptimal means it is not optimal. Since it is not optimal, it may be suboptimal. Pareto, this Pareto concept means, there are three things in Pareto optimal analysis. One is Pareto improvement, other is Pareto optimality, or other is Pareto deprovement. If we are already at the Pareto optimal situation, this means that there is nothing we can do to improve the situation of the society or the agents of the economy. Now, if it is Pareto suboptimal, there is scope for Pareto improvement. And there are two theorems in economics, students, welfare theorem 1 and welfare theorem 2. It has something to do with perfectly competitive market and Pareto optimality. So the point that I want to make here is that if a situation, whether it is from the perspective of production or from the perspective of consumption, if I say it is not Pareto optimal, this means that everybody is not happy with that outcome. Everybody is not satisfied with the situation. Means it is not Pareto optimal, means it is Pareto suboptimal. So is there anything that we can do to go back to the Pareto optimal situation? If we can do, this process is called Pareto improvement. So Pareto improvement options is there if we have Pareto suboptimality. And students, this Pareto suboptimality could be because of distortion in any form, of any form. It could be endogenous, it could be exogenous, it could be domestic, it could be foreign, it could be production, it could be consumption. Again, there is something, in case of economics where the market fails, and the market failure is often due to externality. So presence of externality, it could be positive externality, it could be negative externality. Positive externality, to give you an example, when I use body deodorant, the use of deodorant gives you some sort of satisfaction. You feel happy, you feel good. So I am using it, I have bought this thing, the money has been spent by me, but you are feeling good. So this is a kind of positive externality of something. If I do gardening, the person who passes by this garden, he also feels good. This is positive externality. If I go for vaccination in health service or in health economics per se, then if I do vaccinate myself, then my vaccination helps you to keep yourself unaffected. So that is positive externality. And negative externality means if I do smoke, this smoke creates negative externality or some health hazards. So this externality is driven market failure, because when there is externality, I am spending money and you are feeling better, means without paying anything, means I am paying for your betterment. So if that is the case, then market fails. So if there is externality driven market failure, then it could be one set of many causes of distortion as well in the economy. So that happens in free market system. And in imperfectly competitive markets, both commodity and factor markets are another important set of sources of distortion in the economy. So in perfectly competitive market, distortion may prevail because of government initiative. In perfectly competitive market, distortion may come because of externality. In imperfectly competitive market, distortion may also come because of market imperfections. In fact, in case of unionized wage, means when the wage rate or the salary of labor is fixed by some external force, it could be because of what I said is government initiative, because often government fixes the wage rate. So that is again a kind of distortion, means we are not allowing the market to operate freely. Because free market operation means if there is excess supply or excess demand, price of that thing must increase or decrease simultaneously or respectively. So if there is excess demand, the price must go up. So in case of unionized wage rate, even if there is excess supply in an economy like India, when there is unemployment situation, wage rate should go down. But if you go to the government sector, the salary is fixed. So it is another kind of distortion, because market is not allowed to function properly. And due to distortion in these situations, immiserization can happen. That would be the final point, trigger point of our lecture. Now, what kind of distortion? Because I hinted at the very beginning, the simplest way to understand different types and causes of distortion, how we can do that, is to look at different ways the socially optimum condition may be violated in an economy. Socially optimum condition means the equilibrium price or equilibrium output, which is acceptable by all the agents of the economy, all the agents staying or residing in the society. If everybody is happy with the price and the quantity consumed, sold and purchased, then I can say that this is socially optimum condition. And in market situation, the equilibrium conditions are two. One is MR is equal to MC, and the MC curve is upward rising and cutting the marginal revenue curve from below. This is the production and the market equilibrium condition. And in case of consumption, the equilibrium condition is that price should be equal to the marginal utility, or the marginal rate of subjective substitution should be equal to the commodity price ratio. I'll come to that substitution issue in a moment. So, we know that the socially optimum production and consumption bundles under autarky. So, I'm talking about pre-trade situation, not the free trade or post-trade situation. So, there is no trade, means autarkic. Without trade, what can happen? So, in this situation, the equilibrium and socially optimum combination of production and consumptions are characterized by the equilibrium condition, which is like, if you look at the slide, it is MRSH is equal to PA is equal to MRTH. Let me explain these things a little bit. So, MRSH is marginal rate of substitution, H stands for home, and this is marginal rate of transformation at home, and PA is the autarkic price ratio. So, what does that imply? MRSH is marginal rate of subjective substitution between two goods. So, I am substituting between two goods or all the available goods in the economy. In a two commodity framework, I am substituting between two goods X and Y. Say, there is a ratio at which I do substitute. Means, if I go for consuming one good more, I need to cut back the consumption of the other commodity, because otherwise I have to move to another indifference curve and the utility may change. So, I am talking about one indifference curve, and along the indifference curve, marginal rate of subjective substitution is defined by MRS. H means at home. And the consumer's equilibrium means this ratio of marginal rate of subjective substitution should be equal to the price ratio. Therefore, MRSH is equal to PA. So, this means the consumption equilibrium is satisfied in the economy. Now, look at the other two things. So, PA is the commodity price ratio. So, it is not different for producer and the consumer. So, consumer is buying a commodity at a price at which price the producer is selling the same commodity. So, the price ratio should be same for both the agents, both the producer and the consumer. So, and at the same time, the producer is also transforming two goods, because the producer actually transforms one into another by reshuffling or reallocating factors of production from one good to another good. If the goods are X and Y, then just by moving some factors of production from X to Y, the producer can produce more of X and less of Y, or conversely. So, that rate of transformation should also be equal to the factor price ratio, and eventually at the market, the rate at which X is being transformed into Y, essentially it is nothing but the opportunity cost. Student, you remember it has been discussed in detail in your microeconomics, and at equilibrium that should be equal to the price, and autarkic price. There is no trade. So, in pre-trade situation, the consumer and the producers, both the agents, are happy if these two equalities hold true simultaneously. So, at the optimum, the absolute slope of the community indifference curve represented by the MRSH must be equal to the absolute slope of the production possibility curve represented by the marginal rate of transformation at H, means at home. So, this is the first order condition for maximizing social welfare of the home country, given that the economy resource constraint we have. Along with this, we can think of introducing the world economy, because now we are gradually moving from autarkic situation to trade situation or post-trade situation. Now, international trade essentially allows a country to consume beyond its production possibilities. Students, you remember, due to trade, we are not confined by the production possibility frontier. Rather, we can trade along a price line which is tangent to the production possibility frontier, but tangent to the community indifference curve at a different level. So, this means that the welfare of the economy may increase and trade makes this possible. So, thus, our home country in the analysis can exchange its domestically produced goods with a foreign country. Now, if we replace this PA by PW means the world price. So, the equilibrium condition may be modified a little bit. And how this is going to be modified? Now, look at equation number 2 here, and this equation is given by this one. So this part MRSH was also there before, MRT was also there before, and both these two things are equal to PA. Now I am replacing PA by PW. What is PW? PW is the world price. And if my PW for some reason is equal to PA, then these three things are equal. MRSH is equal to MRTH is equal to PW. Now, the question is whether this point of tangency for the community indifference curve and the domestic PPF and the ratio of price at the world market is equal to marginal rate of transformation at the foreign means at the international market. If that is, then everybody, not only the consumer and the producer of the domestic economy, all the producers and the consumers at the international market, they are also happy. So there is no distortion. Everybody is happy at the price level, at the community indifference curve consumption level, equilibrium, and the marginal rate of transformation means production possibility is also at equilibrium at domestic, at foreign level. So there is no distortion. So this naturally indicates that if these equalities do not hold true, then distortion may exist. Now what kind of distortion we may have? Now look at it. The foreign distortion means my MRTH, marginal rate of transformation along the domestic PPF, is not equal to marginal rate of transformation at foreign means at the foreign PPF. And it is called foreign distortion, since the left-hand side equality implies that there would have been no distortion in the economy if it did not participate in the international trade, because the distortion is coming from the international market here. Now, even if the home country had not participated in international trade, the marginal rate of substitution in consumption and the marginal rate of transformation in production in the home country may not be the same. Now, this is called domestic distortion. What kind of domestic distortion we may have? Students, you look at these two equations very carefully, that if MRS means community indifference curve slope is not equal to domestic PPF slopes, means this is domestic distortion. And if this MRTH is not equal to MRSH, that is also called domestic distortion, but there is a difference. The difference is that in the first case, MRTH is equal to MRTF, whereas in the second case, MRSH is equal to MRTF. So foreign transformation is once equal to domestic substitution, and once it is equal to domestic transformation. Transformation is represented by MRT, and substitution is represented by MRS. So these are the two types of domestic distortion, and these are also indicating kind of consumption distortion when we have some inequality between MRSH and MRTF. So by similar logic, we can also say that the domestic distortion specified here can also be present in case of production distortion. So a distortion could, as I mentioned, just let me mention it here, the distortion could be endogenous when it is caused by market powers of economic agents or the country as a whole, or is caused by technologies that exhibit externalities. On the other hand, domestic distortion may arise not due to market imperfection or market failure, but simply because of trade or industrial policy, means when this country is opened up for trade, you are imposing some tariff, production subsidy, consumption tax, quota, etc. That also leads to some kind of distortion. Students, now let us gradually move to the second part of today's talk. What was the second part? As I mentioned at the very beginning, is that I will first introduce the distortion, and different types of distortion that we may experience in the system. And then we move to immeasurization. First, let me explain the term immeasurization. So, if I divide this word a little bit, not very technically, but you can see from this word that it has something to do with the misery. Misery means we are not feeling good or we are feeling sorry. So, if it is immeasurized, immeasurized means misery is going to be increased because of something. So now perhaps you understand that I am trying to relate distortion and whether this distortion may lead to some sort of misery in the system, misery in the economy. Now we need to compare two situations. One, situation 1, and 2 is the situation when there is distortion. So without distortion, there is free market economy. Markets are perfectly competitive. Government is not intervening. Trade policy is not there. Tax is not there. Subsidy is not there. Then what is the welfare of the society? How much is the welfare of the society in this situation? And then you compare this situation with the welfare of the economy when there is tax or tariff or consumption subsidy or import or quota, or the government is initiating to impose some sort of money wage rate for the unionized labor market, or there is externality in the system. And then we compare the level of welfare of these two situations. If I find that due to the presence of tariff or quota or government initiative or market failure, the economy is gradually moving from higher indifference curve to lower indifference curve, then that would be called immeasurization. So this distortion reflecting the presence of tariff, quota, trade policy, fixed wage rate, market failure is leading to immeasurization. That is our main target. Now, let me use the example that we have used repeatedly in the entire course on international economics. It's a diagram. I have two axes, and on the vertical axis I am measuring computer, and the horizontal axis I am measuring textile. So in this diagram, textile means clothing. So, and I'm focusing only on the home economy, and this home economy is labor abundant, means I have ample supply of labor. And the textile production is a labor intensive production, whereas the computer production is capital intensive production. If that is the case, then following our Heckscher-Ohlin argument, students, you remember that the home country should produce more of labor intensive good. This labor intensive good is clothing. Therefore, the price of that commodity should be less relatively in the home economy. So in that case, if the price is relatively less, then the price line for this textile and clothing should be something and which may not be identical with the price line if there is any distortion. Say the price line is given by P1. At this P1 price, this is flatter. This is flatter means your price of textile is very low. If it is low, then the production equilibrium takes place at point A and the consumption equilibrium takes place at point E1. And E1 consumption equilibrium point means the consumption equilibrium is taking place at E1, indicating that the indifference curve I6 for the home economy is tangent with the price line. Students, you remember what I said is that PA, the price ratio, should be equal to MRSH at the equilibrium, the pre-trade situation. So your pre-trade price ratio is equal to the MRSH at point E1, and the same price ratio is equal to the slope of this PPF at point A indicating that marginal rate of transformation between textile and computer is equal to the price ratio P1 at point A. This means everybody is at equilibrium, both the producer and the consumer, in pre-trade situation, and the welfare level is denoted by U1, indicating that your indifference curve I6 is tangent with the price line P1 at point E1. Now, you know that what I said, textile is the exportable commodity for the home economy because textile uses labor more and the home economy is labor intensive, labor abundant, and textile is labor intensive good. Now, naturally, I'm not going to put a tariff or tax on export usually, but we can do that. We may come to that issue if needed. But usually, we impose tariff on importable production or importable good or import. And which commodity I do import here? I do import here the computer. So if the computer is there and the price of the computer at the international market is PC and I do impose a tariff on PC, then the tariff inclusive price is going to be PC into 1 plus T. In that case, your price ratio could be a relatively steeper one. This price, tariff inclusive price of computer is now higher. So in a higher price ratio, your production equilibrium may be somewhere else. But the point that I want to mention here is that the moment tariff is imposed, the home producers actually shift some factors from the production of textile to the production of computer. So my PPF is no longer this one. Rather, my PPF is now this one, indicating that I am producing more of computer and I am producing less of textile. If this is the price ratio, then the production equilibrium takes place at point B and the consumption equilibrium takes place at point E2, indicating that at point E2, your community indifference curve I3 is tangent with this price ratio, which is relatively steeper now. So this is indicated by line 2. So production equilibrium is here, the consumption equilibrium is here. But what is happening, students, if you look at this diagram very carefully, that your welfare is going down from U1 to U2. So if it goes down from U1 to U2, then it is definitely immiserization in the system. Also, here imposition of tariff is actually immiserizing. Or you can say that here your comparative advantage is on textile production, but eventually because of distortion, you are producing more of that commodity for which you do not have comparative cost advantage. So this is one thing. Now, what will happen if I have growth in scarce factor? If the growth in scarce factor takes place, similar kind of results we may experience. The similar kind of result we may experience means what? So here I am not experiencing a reduction in the production of textile, rather I am experiencing an increase in output production in computer. So my PPF is not actually shifting, it is rotating from PP1 to PP2. So production of computer is capital intensive. Now suppose that the home country experiences growth in capital, which is not compatible with country's efficient line of production. So I am actually moving away from efficient line of production to relatively inefficient line of production. So in that case, again, what is happening? My equilibrium is moving from point E1 to point E2, indicating that my welfare is going down. So given this situation, the country specializes here in wrong direction, that is in importables. over which I do not have comparative cost advantage. So it's a kind of distortion that is taking place. So because of immeasurization, we move from E1 to E2. Now, a very interesting implication is that if we experience an increase in the abundant factor, in our case, the factor abundance in home country is labor, and textile uses labor more intensively. Therefore, an increase in labor will lead to shifting or rotating of the production possibility frontier from PP1 to PP2, just like this diagram, because here this PPF is moving away following my horizontal axis. So from P1 to P2. In that case, so output of textile increases from P1 to P2 as textile production is labor intensive. Therefore, what is happening when textile production goes up in this system, the price of textile should ideally decline. If that happens, then I am no longer on this price line 1. My price line is going to be a flatter one relatively, and the flatter price line is 2. So when my price line was 1, my equilibrium point was E1, and when my price line is 2, my equilibrium point is E2. So what is happening here? When a welfare of the economy is declining from utility level 1 to utility level 2. So again, this is immeasurization. So here what happens actually when there is a change in the price ratio means there is change in terms of trade. So if that terms of trade changes and if your terms of trade goes down, then terms of trade is going to have some negative effect on the total welfare, but at the same time, you may have some positive or negative effect on the volume of trade perspective. So if your terms of trade deterioration outweighs the volume effect or the wealth effect, then we can have immeasurization. So this trade-off takes place, and whether there is immeasurization or not, that depends on whether the negative effect is greater than the positive effect. Therefore, what are the conclusions and the key takeaways of today's lecture on distortion and immeasurization? That distortion is a situation of Pareto suboptimality or socially suboptimal production and consumption of commodities. Distortions are of two types. It could be endogenous distortion, it could be exogenous distortion. Endogenous distortion is caused by market powers of economic agents or the country as a whole, or it may be caused by technologies that exhibit externalities, which I explained in great detail. Exogenous distortion could happen due to import tariff, production subsidy, consumption tax, or wage tax. And this distortion may often lead to immeasurization that I just explained. And this immeasurization happens when an increase in economic activity is associated with a fall in real living standard of the economy or the economic agents of the society. The increased economic activity may be reflected in greater inputs of labor, capital, land, or any other resources which have an opportunity cost in the system. So that's all in this module. Thank you, students, for your patient hearing.